Hi HR Nation, it's Chris Rainey. Welcome to HR Leaders, the show where we interview today's most successful and innovative HR practitioners 5 days a week. Today we have a special guest and a very, very special episode for you guys. I'm joined by Chris Havrilla, Talent, Technology and Future of Work Whisperer and President at Havrilla LLC. Chris, welcome to the show. How are you?
Thank you. I'm great.
Thank you for joining us. I'm really excited about today's episode, something quite unconventional for the listeners. I'm really excited. So
unconventional is good for me. I like that. Let's do it.
The industry that we all operate in is unconventional and changing rapidly, so we have to call it that at this day and age.
Absolutely.
For our listeners that haven't come across yourself before, Chris, give us a little bit about your background and yourself personally, and also a little bit about your journey to where we are today.
Absolutely. I've had a wackadoodle journey, but I think everybody has. I love your story. Just getting into this space, but honestly, I started off in school. I went to school to be in computer science. I started coding at the age of like 9, and I went to school and I got what was relatively a new degree back then. As an MIS degree, so computer science for business, and it was awesome because it was a funded program via IBM at the school I went to at the time, and I won't even tell you how many years ago it was, 30 plus. Oh, wait, I didn't say that. Never mind. But it was cool because they had these different concentrations, and AI was the concentration that I picked. And I only mention that because it's mildly ironic and totally, related to what we're about to talk about. And here we are 30 plus years later. Again, I didn't say those years, strike that. But I moved in, I started my career as a software engineer and applying it to business. I had this really cool opportunity to move into recruiting while I was at Deloitte, and purely to get off the road, as a road warrior consultant and help build experienced hire recruiting, which was new to them at the time. Management consulting was exploding, and they couldn't grow consultants fast enough, out of campus, and it just fell in love with the whole function, and maybe coming out of consulting, it was or a service function. I had been in corporate, IT as well, and the fact that talent is so critical to what you do. Your products and services are great, but they're only going to get you so far. But your people are key. And on the other side of that, the reason I love tech was because of data. And and I think that's the other critical differentiator in business, right? Is information management. How do you manage information through the organization so people can do their jobs and take action, right? And so I've been blessed to work on both sides, but I did embark in this functional career in HR as a doer and as a leader. But I eventually married it all together because I'm still a geek at heart, and I love change, I love technology, and I love how it can enable us to do more and better and different. And so how does that all come together with the realities? So I've been pretty blessed to do that. But yeah, I married it all together, and I help companies, whether I go internal or whether I do it externally as a consultant. To me, it's kind of the same. It's where I sit and how I'm paid, but it's, I'm really just solving problems around the world of work and people.
Well, what a fascinating background, and how timely. I think you're in the best possible position right now with the future world of work and the way that HR is moving and the challenges that HR leaders are having and how the departments are transforming. Someone like yourself with your background is in a fantastic position to help. So I'm excited that we've got you on the show. Tell us a little bit more about what we're going to be talking about today.
So, for me, I did this presentation at Tech HR in India just last week. And, and my goal was to come in and kind of demystify this whole concept of AI. And you can see I actually called it, I call this the intelligence age. I think we've gone through transformations in technology, but also around talent. We've kind of had this industrial age where we were all about, okay, let's standardize things and do things a certain way, and then we had this information age, which was fueled by enterprise software that is where we ended up just slaving to the machine, but we brought all those forms and standardizations and put them online and tried to automate and I think there were a lot of misses in that. And I think we're now going into this kind of intelligence age where, we can maybe make the technology finally work for us instead of us working, for the tech. And so I really wanted to demystify a little bit of what AI is, because I don't think we're actually there yet, but help people understand what these concepts mean. I think if you haven't grown up in tech, it probably seems a lot more complex than it really is. And so I want to give people perspectives. Right? It is. It's very overwhelming. So I kind of wanted to bring this into everyday speak so people can start having conversations about how do you actually bring this in to your organizations and make it work when we've failed to bring in technology and make it work in our organizations for the last 30 years. So that part actually hasn't changed. Little secret. We're just going to actually have to do the work that we should have been doing all along to make the technology work for us. But the stakes are higher, right? If we do this wrong, it's not just kind of wow, this doesn't work for us very well. There's actually, probably bigger ramifications with intelligence software, because it's doing our transactions for us and helping give guidance and recommendations and stuff like that. So what do we do with it is really what we're getting out of intelligent software. But that intelligent software has to be doing it right. So all the learning and development and feedback we should have been doing with people all along, we have to do with machines now. And I just wanted to give people that concept as they start to embark on this. So kind of how to go about doing this and doing it effectively, so it's not a disaster, that it's actually, helpful and gives people the outcomes that they need. And I think there's a pretty structured process to go about doing that. So
fantastic. Well, let's jump in.
Awesome. Great. I'll just ignore the lengthy title and just get into it. And I think, part of why we need to talk about this is why all this is happening and why it's important. And I think there's a lot of forces that are disrupting the world of work. And, and I think those things are what I'm hoping will inspire people to get out of kind of the inertia. It's right now I see a lot of people just kind of frozen because maybe it is overwhelming, but we can't really afford inertia anymore. This doesn't go away because we've got demographics. And when I talk about that, it's, the workforce is changing, right? In I think 2025, I think some of the data, at least here, and I think it's probably already like this in some other parts of the world, but, 75% of the workforce is going to be millennial and below, and that's real data. People's funnel is changing. Their funnel for their, where their pool of talent is changing, and their expectations are different. So we have to think about that. And I also think there's been a little bit of a lack of leadership development in this new, group of leaders upcoming. Whether we were investing in it as an organization or whether people were staying even long enough to get it, because they're moving around a lot. That's kind of the, I have gig economy on here, but it's more of a gig mindset, I think. I don't know if the gig economy has really come to fruition the way we thought, but I do think there's a gig mindset because people are thinking about their own careers, right? They're thinking about how do I get the breadth and depth of skills? How do I get things done? And they get frustrated by bureaucracy and inertia in companies, and they move on. Right? So regardless of why they're not getting that development, it's not happening. And I think the technological disruptions that are happening with all this, onset of intelligent software and the expectations around personalization. So kind of, what we expect as a consumer and what we're getting from Google and Facebook and Amazon, why can't we have that in the world of work where we're spending most of our time, right? So all of these forces are things that should be igniting all of us in HR to say, okay, how do we get ahead of this? How do we, not even getting ahead, it's here. So, so I wanted to talk about a little bit of the why before we do that. And there was some great, research that came out of IBM just recently. They did their 19th edition of the Global C-Suite study. And so this is completely out of there. And I actually have a link in this presentation so people can go see it. There's some really interesting insights in there. But, they kind of encapsulated all the CEO challenges that that they're seeing out of that research and the thousands and thousands of people in the C-suite that they talk to, and this is what they're facing, right? And this is from their perspective of the business disruption. So again, going back to that disruptive technology and the new business models, and certainly, you know, from that perspective, I say, yay, those are great disruptions, right? Because you know, we need all of that. The emergence of new and different competitors all the time, you know, my perspective on that is, you know, so what? You know, get your eye on the ball, and that takes care of itself. You know, I think if you're always focused on your competitors and not on your customers and your employees, where, you know, your end result is going to come from, then, but I get it. It's, you know, it's a worry, but I think do the right things and the right things will happen. These talent disruptions, you know, I think a lot of C-suite, you know, don't feel that their workforces have the skills, you know, to go into this next wave of what these business models look like. And so, you know, I think they're understanding the proliferation of new skills and reskilling and is accelerating. And what are we doing to do that? And then I think experience, going back to that, you know, and these expectations around personalization and empowering me and giving me what I need to do my job. And part of that is transparency, right? Like, what is it we're trying to do, and giving people clarity of vision. And I think, you know, there are retention issues around these expectations. People are going to continue to move on and leave if they're not getting the experience that they need to feel valued and add value. So you know, they gave like kind of the top priorities of these CEOs, and to me, you know, that's, from a CHR perspective, our requirements, right? These are all
I completely agree.
people related. So, you know, I'm kind of making that equation here is, you know, I mean, if they're saying their number one thing is to invest in people and to grow business dynamics and improve business leaderships and help leaders bring up, you know, the rest of the workforce to do all this, accelerating change and readiness and creating agile operations, all of these things we have an impact on in HR. So I think it's good insights and more reasons why people need to step back and say, you know, I've got to drive this, you know, I've got to do this. So what do I need to learn and what do I need to do? Because our skills have to change as well. You know, I talked a little bit about that information age, and you know, we've had this conundrum, and I loved HR.com had a great surveys, and you know, and one of the questions was about, you know, fearing working for robots one day, and I'm laughing because I'm like, you guys have been working for the machine for I don't know how long, right? Like the last 30 years we've been a slave to the beast of technology, and you know, we're not out adding value because we're busy feeding the machine all this data, you know, and I think this information age was we were data rich and information poor, right? You know, I call it the drip syndrome. You know, I learned that when I was working in healthcare. They have all this data, right? And I love that syndrome because, you know, where's the value in all this? Well, we've been busy just feeding the machines and not always very well, right? We've done it all the while we've been doing workarounds and shortcuts and everything else. So our data is not necessarily great all the time, but you know, technology is always invested in as a solution, right? It's a silver bullet and the easy button, and it's the answer to all of our problems, which is how we came to work for the software. But it's also how we came to all the distrust and dislike of tech today. So I think that's freezing a lot of us because we're going, oh boy, here we go, right? Yeah. So, you know, I have in here, you know, I was just kind of going through kind of current state of affairs in HR today, but I think we all feel the pain of that. But I really wanted to kind of, you know, crack this code on this evolution of talent. And we've talked a little bit about it, the industrial age and the transactions and the standardization and the forms, and then the information age. We had this focus on process and automation, and it was like reports, and you know, but I think really this new wave is about how do we make decisions? You know, how do we augment the transactions, or take what we got out of the transactions and all that data and augment and add value, right? And take it to the next level, and, you know, not working on the machines, but working on relationships and action and outcomes. And I think that's really the new focus that people need to be thinking about. And that's, what are our outcomes? And then working our way back to doing that. And so, again, this is an eye chart, and and it's really more for people to take and think about later on, right? But again, there's I've always been a person that is like, let me start from the outcomes. And that's kind of how do we embrace this intelligent age, right, of software and thought processes. And so let's think about where we are today, which is like in that information age and all these transactions. And and these are all the things that that people have been working on the last 30 years. But where we're trying to get to, right, is that future state. How do we have value out of this data? How do we get information and impact and learning and insights, and how we can make recommendations and give guidance and actually do something with it by making decisions and being accountable to these outcomes. And I think the key from getting to the current state to the future state is this transformation, right? And so I air quote AI, and I'll talk about that in a minute. But AI is kind of an umbrella of a lot of different things, and natural language processing, which is our Siri and our Alexas, and how it interprets our speech, and machine learning is how the machines learn from all this data that we have, and so we have all of these things. But what I'd like to do is kind of demystify AI, my air quotes.
Sure. The scary word everyone hears.
Yeah, it is, and I want to try to make this a little less scary, because
before we jump into that, Chris, because one of the questions that I hear a lot is where do I start?
Right.
What advice would you give to? It's quite overwhelming, right, for someone who doesn't have your background.
It is, and I think the only way to start is to understand what these concepts are, and then you can do something with it, right? And so I wanted to give some perspectives on AI, and I, like a lot of my stuff, I rip it off from different areas, because I'm a student of all this stuff, and I have been for 30 plus years, and I love the reading on by Andrew Ng. And I'd suggest a lot of people go read his stuff, because he really makes this simple. And I loved how he put this. He's like, AI really isn't AI yet. It's, really what it is supervised learning systems. And so what does that mean? There's really three aspects to making this AI work. And, I just prefer to call it, intelligent software, intelligent automation, intelligent augmentation. Mm-hmm. And it's really about data. And I think getting this concept of understanding data is, when we're talking about new skills in HR, is people have to understand basics about data analysis, and how do you look at data and start answering questions and getting insights. So data is at the heart of it. I put it at the top for a reason. That's how machine learning is done. That's how everything is done. AI is data, and it's what is done with it, right? And what is done with it is applied algorithms, and so what does that mean? They're business rules. That's what they are. It's the how do you apply this data? What is this learning? And that's why human teachers are so imperative to this process, right? Is machines are wired to do what we tell them to do. It's pure and simple. That's what algorithms are. We're telling the machine what to do with all this, and the machine can actually learn that too. But it's taking all this data and making its own assumptions out of that. So we kind of have to learn how the computer does that, so we can actually learn, what an algorithm is doing and what this machine learning may be doing. So I'm going to jump into that, and hopefully this will clarify. But I want people to remember this slide and to look back at it, because all this is, it's not magic, at all. It is literally
that slide is probably the best example I've seen, by the way. It's so simple, straight to the point. You look at it and you
all this is. It's all this is. And and we have to, like, the machine can decide what to do with it, but I'm going to tell you, I think like a machine sometimes, so I understand this, but sometimes we make assumptions based on what we know, and we don't always have all the information. So, and my kids could tell you this, my husband could tell you this, it's just, they can tell you. I go off into left field sometimes, but I'm only working with the data that I have, and I'm very literal. And so I may make assumptions, and we've all done it based on all we know, and then somebody gives us that other piece of information. You're like, well, heck, if I knew that,
yeah,
my path was really logical. It looks psychotic, but it's really logical because I went over here, but it was the only information I had. So the machines don't work a whole lot, different than that. So I can appreciate it. But I put this picture up of this fruit bowl, and I'll tell you, this came from a book by Ursus Worley, and I completely ripped this off from John Sumser because I think it is the most brilliant way to give a perspective on data and how machines interpret data that I've seen. And I had this great conversation with John, and I know he uses this, and I completely ripped it off because I wish I could think of a better way to really put it out there. But you look at this picture, and it's a fruit bowl, right? And I think the brilliance that Ursus Worley did in his book, and there's some TEDx talks out there, and I've got his credit down here so people can look up the TEDx and the books. But what he does, he's an artist, and he deconstructs art or objects into the pieces. And it's really fun look at art and books, and in this categorization standpoint. So if you go to the next page, and this is actually the book that this came from, what he did with this fruit bowl is deconstructed. So you see the bowl and the spoon, and all the different pieces of fruit and the whipped cream, and you're like, what is next to the blueberries here? And I'll go back, and you look at that bowl, and it had a bunch of dots on it. And so like that's what the machine does. Like we don't even think like that. We're like, oh well, the data is the fruit, right? But this is the bowl, the fruit, and the dots in that. And so we maybe make assumptions even about the data and look at it differently than a machine would. But the machine is completely literal. So it's taking every single aspect of this fruit salad. But what the machine didn't do, that we all know if we like fruit salad, is that the real magic of that fruit salad is how it all comes together. And even more so, like that juice at the bottom of the bowl, that's like, it's like the best part, it's like cereal and milk, and sometimes drinking that milk with all the bits of cereal at the bottom, that's like the best part. Machine doesn't get that. There's no fruit juice that it sees, but that's the magic we bring to it, right? We put this all together and we get that fruit juice. And so I give this perspective because it's like, this is how man and machine need to work together, right? And that is really the essence of what a machine does with data. So we got to make sure it's doing the right things. It didn't know to put this fruit juice together, right? And what the heck's it going to do with these dots, and how does that mess up the equation? So we have to teach the machines, and they may come out, they may learn this, but they didn't learn the fruit juice at the bottom. So how can we guide those business rules, right? How do we audit this process to make sure the machines are getting what we needed to do, or that we take out of this, oh, okay, here's what the components are, but what do I do with it to get to that fruit juice? Because that's what we all want. It's experience. It's, all of these things. So that I just wanted to give those two perspectives, because this is AI. This is how man and machine come together. And this is where the human teachers come in, right? So we have the data, we have the business rules, right, that we put this fruit together. But we, the human teachers are the ones that say, yeah, don't forget to drink the juice, please. That's the best part. So there's AI for you. That's
Very cool
that's
way
really
of
it in
putting
a nutshell.
It's making me want a fruit bowl.
I know,
now.
right? I'm getting hungry, so I'm going to speed through this a little bit better, because now I'm hungry too. And, this is, again, another, eye chart. And I'm not going through it, but this is really some of the use cases around, what I call intelligent, automation or augmentation, and these are some of the things that, and some of the promises and some of the use cases that there are out in the space right now. But you also have to say, okay, let me come back to these concepts, right? Let me come back to these concepts and say, it doesn't mean that it's doing it right. It doesn't mean that all of a sudden there's no, all the bias is gone. The data is rich with all of our biases. It's been recording our biases for the last 30 years, right? So we have to still be aware of it. And we still have to make sure that the machine is not learning what we just have been doing for the last 30 years. And we have so much more awareness now, and we're guiding that. We're taking what these recommendations are and this guidance that comes out of the machine and going, is that right? especially when there's a negative impact or even a positive impact. Like, let's look at the impact of what this guidance is the machine is giving us and saying, is it right? Let's audit it, just like we should have been doing with our people all along, by the way. The learning, the feedback, the management, the true looking at performance, the guidance, all the things we haven't taken time to do with the people. People are in general, this is a generalization, wired to do a good job. And they'll phone a friend, they'll do whatever to do that. The machines are wired to do what we tell them to do. So the human teacher part is so critical, especially in figuring out if our data is telling them the right thing, or did it go off in left field in a really logical way, because that's what we've been teaching it. So I'll leave people to look at this. And, and certainly questions anytime, and how you bring this together, I'm always available to people to talk about. I still think it's a crime I get paid to do what I do. But I do want to give people a concept of how to start thinking about this. And again, I think we always have goals, and we have outcomes, and what's in the middle of this, to kind of bring this together. Like, how do we back into that? So we have to know what our outcomes are. And this is, the kind of the ABCs of how we should have always been doing this. And that's, around competency and, what does it take for us to get our jobs done and to do a good job? And then, accountability, what's the framework by which to do it and to know we're doing our job right? And those are kind of the questions that you ask. And the motivation is, are we really not only just holding people accountable, but are we motivating people to do this by their experience and their engagement and, their rewards? And, are we incenting the right behavior? Because, you can give people tools, but if we don't change how they work, how does that ever get maximized? And we have to not only hold people accountable to it, but we have to truly motivate them. This has to be their goal. Like, they have to really own that. And so what are we doing to make sure that people are, rewarded for the behavior, or they're even drawn to it, right? Like, if you're not drawn to this, you're not going to do well at it. So we need to help people understand, what that clarity of vision is. But that's kind of the framework around it. And there's a lot of detail behind this, and I'm glad to share it. But those are the basic core questions and things that people have to think about and how you get to that outcome. And my goal here is just to present that framework. So let's see where we, in terms of, the transition, and, I don't know why the slide didn't come up with the keys. I'm going to go back to that so I can get you the right format. But, there are some keys to this, and part of it is data, right? We have to get our data clean. If it's not clean, we have to get it clean. If we don't have the data, we have to find the data, buy it, access it, whatever it is. But data is imperative to this. And hopefully people are getting that. Data is, if you don't feel like data is sexy, you find a way to, get, turned on by it, because, you need to. That's the key to all of this, right? The machines can do and cull data and look at data and trends and patterns in ways we can't do. We don't have the time or the capacity to do it, and the machines do. And there's so much data out there, internal and external. So getting some love around that and realizing the power it gives us, that's hot. Find that sexy, get turned on by that, or find something else to do, because this is the key. The other part of it is decisions. And again, I'll get you the right slide, but it's what we do with it. Right? We have all the data in the world, but if we don't have information and insights to make decisions, then that's key too, right? So, I'll talk a little bit more about that when we start going through this, but I think those are the key elements. And the last one that would have been on this slide is deployment, and how do we deploy it? And that's the kind of the how that I'll talk about in just a second. But at a high level, it's time to do the work that we didn't do all along. We really need to understand the business strategy. And I know there are pockets of amazing leaders that have been doing this. And, look, what is it we're trying to do? And not necessarily just what the business tells us. Sometimes the business is just saying ROI and margins and everything, and they've lost sight of actually what their customers need. The ROI and the growth and the margins all come if you're taking care of your customers. So really understanding that business strategy and what makes a customer happy, I think, is really important, because I think if your employees are happy and understand that vision and we're giving them what they need to do that, all that thing, just all kinds of lines up. So that functional alignment to what the business strategy is critical. So we should have been doing this all along. If you've been doing it, great. If you're not, get that kind of focus and understand what their outcomes are, know the what's and whys. Understand data is really important, and this comes in a lot of forms, and some of it's created and some of it we have, and some of it we need to buy or procure or leverage. But this next bullet point is critical in terms of, understand that no matter whether it's machines in your workforce and you're not ready to move into this intelligence age, or you are, auditing and learning and development and feedback is the key, no matter what. But even more critical with machines that are wired to do what we tell it to do or what it's learning to do. Got to make sure that's right. And this reskilling is not only of our workforces, but it's of ourselves. And I think there's speed and ethics and compliance and risk, and we deal with all that now, but it changes with all of this, right? Another reason we have to continually audit the machines that might be guiding us down that path, and I think transparency is key in all of this. And my last bullet on here is about an innovative mindset and approach is critical, right? With all the technological disruptions and things that we're facing, cultural and demographics and everything is changing how we work and how work gets done. So when we go back to reskilling, this is the other thing besides data, I think that we need to get ourselves up to speed on. And the concepts aren't as complex as people think, but this concept around innovation is really just design thinking and agility. And, it's not hard to learn. There's a pretty structured framework around doing design thinking, which seems a little counterintuitive, right? A structured methodology to get outside the box. It's like, wait, what? But I mean, it really keeps us honest to doing that. And so I think those are all critical skills to learn, is this concepts around AI, data and analysis, and design thinking and agility. That's how we work, and work getting done is changing. So, again, people can look at this later, consume it, and if they have questions can ask me, but this is really the core mindset. And I think mindset is really important right now, in shifting, the way we think, but also the way that we have to think. Our whole workforce has to think, right? And it's this focus on human needs and listening deeply. And, we do a lot of telling and not a lot of showing, and we try to make things more complex than we really need, but make things visual. It was great at the Tech HR. They had Tony Buzan talking about mind mapping, and, and it kind of goes back to this concept of, really, we all have one language, and it's pictures, right? A picture of a monkey is a picture of a monkey no matter where you are and what language you're in. And so think about that from a visualization standpoint. And, how do we make things more simple instead of more complex? That's why we have bureaucracy and inertia. We've made things so complex. And I think this concept of diversity is so critical, not only to attracting the right workforce and getting, the right thinking, is because it's more about cognitive diversity. And, because I think when everyone is thinking alike, they're not thinking very much.
No, not at all.
And so, I think that's a concept people need to understand, and building what we need. And, and we can just look at software today, and there's like all these massive amounts of robust features, and we only use a core of it. Like, keep it simple. Like, what are you trying to do? What are you trying to provide? And I think you've got to, experiment, right? Like, it's prototyping, and that sounds really intimidating, but it's really not. It's just trying stuff, and just, what our outcomes are. So mindset, things to think about. Again, this is kind of some of the breakthroughs in AI today for our typical current state of affairs. And, again, an eye chart, but I wanted people to have something to take away and look at. And I did an exercise with the group, because I really wanted to demystify even design thinking. And I talked about audience mapping. I use a lot of maps to be, to get kind of the visualization and to take people through that process, so it isn't so intimidating. And one of the things that one of the things people do is, they don't focus on what the actual problem is. And so I take them through a kind of a, don't start with what you want, start with what you don't want, and then you can get to what you do want. So it's just a mapping exercise and just a sample of some of the different ones I use throughout the design thinking process, which I like to teach and teach people how to fish, so to speak. And then as a consultant, I try to play advisor and let them drive and do it, but be there in the boat with them so that they really learn how to put the stuff into practice. And so that's what it's all about. And that's really, that's really it. I think, and I don't know if I put this in here, and if not, I'll give it to you. But I took people through the 12 steps of how I do work and how I've gone in through organizations, usually through technology and analytics, but took them through the whole
end-to-end
process. Journey. Yeah, the whole
I think
journey.
That'd be very, very helpful for the members, so we can link that in the description. I think
absolutely, and it's there's a blog post on my website that outlines it, and I can certainly give people where there's questions. Send me questions, and I've got all my contact information that I can give you, and I'm glad to kind of break this down with everybody because I think this is the key for us to take this to the next level. It's been the secret to my success through the years of taking companies through transformation in whatever form that was. And it's a pretty structured methodology, but it's worked for me every time because I don't come in with a solution. I don't come in with some magic bullet. I come in with a process to get to the answers and in a way to help people go through the change to make it actually stick. So,
and I honestly feel like this is exactly what a lot of leaders are missing is that process. A lot of people are looking for that silver bullet, which doesn't exist.
And I apologize. I don't know why. I must have brought up the wrong slide that had the 12 steps in there because, it's a very realistic step through, and like I said, there's more in the blog posts about it, which people can find on my LinkedIn or my website or whatever, and I'll link to it as well when I give you a copy of the deck that has that detail in it.
Fantastic. Well, look, Chris, we really appreciate you sharing your journey, your experience,
Absolutely.
and your process with us. I think it's certainly going to be some actionable guidance for our leaders, and I'm very, very excited to hear the feedback from everyone. Before we part ways, what would be your sort of parting piece of guidance for all of the HR leaders out there that are going through this process? And what's the top piece of advice you'd give to them?
Be scrappy. Have some fun with this. We have an opportunity, I think, for the first time in a long time to really make a difference. And not to be afraid of this. Nobody's done it. I mean, we're all talking about it, right? Experience and personalization and everything. But, if we all wait to watch somebody else do it and wait for it all to work out, we're not going to be able to be competitive. We'll be way behind. Machine learning and this stuff, it takes time. And it takes, doing the right things. So don't wait for everybody else to do it. Be scrappy, get in, experiment. You'll make some mistakes, but you'll do a lot of learning. Get good partners to help you through this process. Innovation by its definition is doing things and doing breakthroughs that nobody else has done. So everybody's safe right now. Everybody's safe to do this and co-create with the people that are closest to what your solutions and outcomes and problems that you're solving need to be. And use a structured methodology around it, because using things like design thinking actually take the risk out of doing it. That's how you get proof of concept. And if you're reducing the risk, you can't prove ROI to any of this. You can't go make this safe for someone. So you have to use a methodology to take the risk and minimize it. And this is a structured way to do it. So, get out there, be scrappy, and just try. Inaction isn't doing anybody any good.
Fantastic. Well, look, guys, make sure you head over to hrleaders.com. There you'll find all of the show notes from this episode, links to everything we've discussed. I'll actually include the links to the presentation deck as well, and also the resource that you mentioned to your blog, Chris, which will be fantastic for everyone. What's the best way? I can see obviously we've got some contact details for you here, but what's the best way for if our members have any questions for you? What is the best way that you prefer them to get in contact with you?
I don't have a preference. If people want fast answers, honestly, texting or calling me is the best way. But you know, I get alerts on Twitter. You know, I get my emails. I'll make sure that's in there through LinkedIn. You know, I'm not hard to find, and I try to be very responsive. There's probably an order of priority, and so anything
Sure.
that alerts my phone that I sleep with and live with is
amazing. Well, look, Chris, thank you again for sharing your journey with us, and
no problem.
I wish you all the best until we
Thank
next
you
week.
so much.